Okay, we're going to start today's Daf Yomi. Just before we start today's Daf Yomi, we just received a email from YouTube that we had 6,113 views last month of our YouTube channel, which is a sign from God, 613. And so what a message from Hashem to give us inspiration. So we're going to start on 21A, and 21B, 3 lines from the bottom. And let's say somebody would write the get on a pottery shard of a flower pot that was removed, that had a hole in the bottom. So you write the pottery shard on a flower pot that has a hole in the bottom. It's still going to be kosher. Why? You now got to write the get on something that's attached to the ground, because then you have to cut it before giving it to the woman. And we said that it has to be giving, writing, and then giving. You can't have cutting in between. So a flower pot with a hole in the bottom, it's like it's attached to the ground. So why is it kosher? So Gemara explains the because you could just pick up the whole flower pot. You don't have to cut it. Just pick up the flower pot and give it to her. So therefore, there's no process of cutting in between. But if you would write it out, let's say you wrote the get on the leaf of that's in a flower pot with a hole in it. Abaye says kosher. Abaye amar kosher v'Rav amar pasul. Abaye says it's kosher. On top of 22A, deshakole v'yayvle nila. Again, you don't have to cut anything. You just pick up the flower pot, which has the leaf on it, and you give it to her. Rava says it's pasul. Gezerah shema yikdom, because there's a decree you might come to chop off the leaf to make it easier. Why do you have to give her the whole flower pot? You don't want to lose the flower pot. You just give her the leaf by ripping it off and then giving it to her, and that would be problematic, and that would be disqualified. So therefore, since we might come to rip off the leaf, for this reason, even if you wrote it on the leaf, and it's not going to be kosher. So since we're talking about a flower pot, the Gemara goes into a little tangent of flower pots with holes in them. Let's say one person owns the flower pot. So one person, it's interesting that the language is, it doesn't want to say this Ram Shel Echad. It says one person owns the flower pot and another one owns the seeds that are in the flower pot. So the flower pot, which has a hole in it, is considered like it's attached to the ground. The flower pot versus the seeds. So the flower pot, even though it has a hole in the bottom of it, it's going to be considered like it's a movable object. Whereas the seeds, they're on the ground. So therefore, they're considered like real estate itself. So how does somebody acquire something that's a movable object? That is acquired through what's called mashicha. You have to pull the object towards you. Whereas how does somebody acquire real estate? Real estate is acquired in one of three ways. The transaction is valid if you have a monetary exchange, if you have a contract, or if you do a proprietary act on the real estate to indicate that it's yours, like you dig a hole in the ground. So now the source states, let's say you have an atzit shel echad, uzram shel echad. The flower pot belongs to one person, and the seed belongs to another. Machar bal atzit lebal zram. The owner of the flower pot says, "I'm selling my flower pot to Shimon, who's the owner of the seeds." Kivin shemashach. Once Shimon has drawn towards him the flower pot, kone, he's acquired it. But machar bal zrayim lebal atzit. But if the owner of the seeds sells the seeds to the flower pot owner, if Shimon sells his seeds to Reuven, Molkana, then the way you acquire these seeds, the way Reuven would acquire the seeds is Achi Yachzik Bizarm. He needs to take a hold of the seeds, and that's how he acquires it. How does he do it? He has to do some proprietary act. Rashi says, like digging from the ground. Let's say one person owns both the pot and the flower seeds, and he sells the pot with the seeds to somebody else. So how does he acquire them? Once the person has done a proprietary act on the seeds, kanet. So Hilchzik Bizraim kan otzitz. So once he has done the proprietary act on the seeds, he's not only acquired the seeds, he's also acquired the flower pot. V'zui sheshanino, and this is the concept that we learned throughout the Talmud, nechas and she'ein lahem achrayas, meaning movable objects. Niknenim nechas and sheyesh lahem achrayas. They can be acquired with the real estate bekaseh v'shtar v'chasaka, through money, a contract, or proprietary act. So it's a very important principle that if you have a movable object, if that movable object is in the property, is on top of the real property, on the real estate, then when you acquire the real estate through one of the accepted methods of acquiring the real estate, money, contract, or proprietary act, you also automatically acquire the movable object. In the real world example, when we sell our chametz on Erev Pesach to the Gentile, one of the ways in which we effectuate the acquisition, the Gentile is not going to come and pick up all of our chametz. It's too much today. Some rabbis, they sell thousands of people's chametz. So what do? Everybody rents out the space where they keep their chametz. When the Gentile acquires the chametz acquires the rental of the space where the chametz is by giving money and a contract, then they are also acquiring the movable objects, the chametz that are on location where you're renting the place. So then it states, but let's say you just did a proprietary act on the flower pot, then then the proprietary act does not acquire the movable object for you. So you have not even acquired the flower pot unless you do the proprietary act on the seeds themselves. Next case, nakvo ba'aretz. Let's say this flower pot is perforated and it is in the land of Israel. The nofo b'chutz la'aretz, but the branches extend outside the land of Israel. Abai Amar Basar Nakvo Aslina. Abai says we follow the pot. The pot is in the land of Israel, so that tree or the vegetable is going to be considered like it grew in the land of Israel. Rava says Basar Nofo Aslina. Rava says we follow the branches. And since the branches are outside the land of Israel, we're going to view the fruit that's on those branches as external to the land of Israel. Gemara says B'de Ishrish. We're going to need to wait for Noam to come and talk to us about the implications of this in border law, etc. But today, when he shows up at the next stop, but for now, this is what the Talmud says: B'de Ishrish, where the tree took root in the ground, Kuliyamol Pligi, where the tree is rooted in the land of Israel, where the roots are in the land. Everybody agrees that it's going to be considered the land of Israel tree. Kipligi b'delo ishrish. They're only arguing where it has not taken root, and so therefore we have the dispute: do we follow the whole or do we follow the branches? The Gemara says with the ishrish you mean to say where it took root? Everybody agrees it belongs to the land of Israel. But didn't we learn in the Mishnah Bama Mitzia? What about the circumstance where there are shtei ganos, two gardens, zu al gabe zu, one garden is on top of the other, v'yerek beintayim, and there's vegetables growing in between the two gardens. Meaning to say, what's the scenario here? The scenario is that the vegetable, Rashi explains it, is rooted in the top garden, but the branches are flowing into the bottom garden. Rabbi Meir Omer Shar Elyon, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shal Tachton. Rabbi Meir says we follow the upper garden, that's where the roots are. And Rabbi Yehuda said as we follow the bottom one. And so we see from here that even where it takes root in one, Rabbi Yehuda still argues and says we follow the branches. Meir says, no, that case is not the same. That case is different. And there in the Mishnah, in Mitzio, the Mishnah actually explains the reasoning. Awesome, there it is like there we actually state the reason. What's the reason that's stated there? Rabbi Meir, only told us afro in Kanyarak, because the top person, since it's growing in his property, he has the right to fill it up with earth, and then there will be no place for the vegetables to grow. And so therefore he says, this is really my tree. And Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Mam Yirtza Tachton, Maos Ganoso Offer in Kanyarak. He says, Rabbi Yehuda says the same thing about the bottom guy. He could fill up his garden with earth, and there would be no place for the vegetables to be there. So therefore, that case is different than a case where it's rooted and the tree goes from Israel to outside the land of Israel. Presumably, it's the same owner there. The person owns the same land, or he's not fighting with another owner. So the Gemara says, "Vakati b'de'ishra. Do you mean to say still that in a case of where it's rooted, everybody agrees it follows after the roots? V'atanya, we have a brisa. Let's say you have a tree partially in the land of Israel, partially outside the land of Israel. We're going to assume that the whole tree is nourished by this mixed up nature of tevel and chulin. Of tevel is untithed produce and chulin is tithed produce that are mixed up together. And so therefore, you have to tithe it, but only from that place. You can't take regular tevel to tithe it or chulin because it's mixed up. So you have to tithe it independently of anything else. That's the position of Rebbe. Whereas Rashbag says, Hagadol b'chiyuv chayev, hagadol b'pater pater. Rashbag says a principle, and the one that grows in an obligated state is obligated, and the one that grows in an exempted state is exempt. And what is Rashbag talking about? My love, isn't he talking about mitzvah, nofel ba'aretz, mitzvah, nofel b'chutz la'aretz? Isn't he talking about a place where part of the branches grow in Israel and part outside? And even though it's completely rooted in the land of Israel, and yet we still say we follow where the branches are. Merit said, no, we're talking about a case of mitzvah sharashim ba'aretz and mitzvah sharashim b'chutz la'aretz. Now we're talking about a place where we follow where the roots are partially rooted in the land of Israel and partially rooted outside the land of Israel. And still, Rashbag is going to say that whatever grows in the land of Israel, the branches in the land of Israel are going to be Israel, and branches that grow outside the land of Israel are outside the land of Israel. And why does he say this position? My time with the Rashbag, the Mavsik Tsunma, because he says that there's a rock that separates the roots, and so therefore, since there's a rock that separates the roots, and so therefore you're only going to get the roots are only going to nourish the branches in Israel, and the roots from Israel only nourish the branches from Israel, and the roots from outside the land of Israel only nourish the branches outside the land of Israel. And my time with the Rebbe, why does Rebbe say his position that everything is mixed together? So he says Rebbe's position is the hadri arve, that they become mixed together in the trunk, that they become the nutrients all mixed together. But Micah Miflgi, what's the argument? Mar Savar Avira ben Balbal. One says that the air mixes them together. When they come out into the airspace, they all get mixed together. The other position of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is that the airspace doesn't mix them together because, but it's because all the airspace is kept separate. But both, and this is significant, Rashi has the line here, where the entire roots are in the land of Israel, where the whole roots are in the land of Israel, there's nobody who follows after the branches. And we could take a tremendous Musar Haskell from this. What's the tremendous Musar Haskell? That if our roots are in the land of Israel, and even if our branches are outside the land of Israel, we're going to be considered like we're part of the land of Israel. Just we have to have the roots in the land of Israel, and then we'll be able to have the spiritual strength even if our branches are outside the land of Israel. Tremendous Musar Haskel from Rashi. So Mara tells us that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, and this is the line from the Mishnah, that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira said that you're not allowed to write the get on a parchment that had already previously been erased, and you can't write it on diphthera. Diphthera is an untreated parchment, whereas the Chum say it's kosher. So Amar B'chia Bar Asi Mishmei De'ua Gimel Orosein. There are actually three types of skins: matzah, chifa, and diphthera. These are three types of untreated skins. Matzah skin is kamash ma'o. This is the skin of the animal. The lo maliach. It's not salted and it's not treated with flour. It's not treated with gold nuts. Why do we care? Well, it says Shabbos. So if you want to carry it on Shabbos, kamashira, what's your amount which you're liable for? The amount it takes to wrap up a small weight with this matzah skin, this hide of the matzah, you use it to wrap up the small weight. And we see from here, some of the commentaries say that matzah is not supposed to have salt in it, because here we see that the identification of the skin of the animal, the parchment, that's not treated with salt, is called matzah. So, and what is a weight? What is the size of a small weight? A quarter of a revius, of a Pumpadisian revius. Chifa, what is this case of the chifa? The maliach will kamiach. The chifa parchment is that it was salted but not treated with flour, go-offits or gold nuts. Why do we carry Shabbos? To carry on Shabbos that you're liable, or kedela sos kamiyah, that is the amount of skin to make an amulet from. And diphthera, what's the diphthera? Demoliach v'kamiach lo-offits. The diphthera it was salted and treated with flour, but it was not treated with gall nuts. And why do we need to know this? Motzah Shabbos, to carry on Shabbos. What are you liable for with the diphthera? You're liable if you have the size that it takes to write a get. So we see from here that this teaching is not like Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda says you can write a get on the diphthera, and from here we see you can, because that's what you're liable for, carrying this diphthera, the size of a get on Shabbos. Now Chachamim say it's kosher with the diphthera or parchment that was erased. Man Chachamim, more these Chachamim who say it's kosher with diphthera or parchment that was erased. Amar Rabbi Lazar, so Rabbi Lazar taught in the name of Rabbi Lazar on the top of 22b. This is Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar says this position, that it's kosher even if you wrote it on parchment that could have been erased. And this is the position of Rabbi Lazar, the Tana, who says Edim Mesiri Karti, who says that you don't really require the signatures, biblically speaking. And so therefore you're going to need to hand over the document in front of the witnesses. So what's our concern? If there were witnesses signed on it, then we're concerned that you could have erased an essential conditional clause to the get. And then that would have been cut out and nobody would know. But since it's being handed over in front of the witnesses will be aware. And so therefore we don't care exactly what it was written on. And that's what Rebbe Lazar says. So our Mishnah says we're not worried about forgery because it's being handed over in front of the witnesses, and the witnesses would indicate it if the document is not reflective of what they saw. Rebbe Lazar says, when does Rebbe Lazar say that this is okay? Only if the get was given over immediately in front of these witnesses. But from now until 10 days, well, it wouldn't be okay, because Chashina, then we'd have to be suspecting Dilma Hava Beit Tinav Viziyafta. Maybe there was a conditional element to it and it became forged. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe there was a conditional element to it and it was forged. And since it took a long period of time, the witnesses forgot about it. And so therefore he says, yeah, it's okay if it was on a document that's able to be forged, because it has to be given over immediately in front of the witnesses who would obviously remember. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan says, even from now until 10 days, even for a long period of time, we're still going to, Rabbi Lazar would still allow it. Chachamim would still say it's kosher. Why? The witnesses would remember if there was a conditional element to it which was cut out. And the Rebbe Lazar says, when Rebbe Lazar allows you to write this get on this document that's able to be forged, she only allows it by Gittin, by a get, but by all other contracts, he says, no, the document has to be written in a way that it can't be forged. Because it says, because it says in Jeremiah, God says to Jeremiah, take these scrolls, this scroll that you're acquiring, this purchase of land, and put them in a pottery utensil so it stand for many days. We see from here the contract has to stand for many days. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, I feel b'shtar, you can even do it by contracts. But doesn't it say we need the contract to last for many days? Rabbi Yochanan says, God is not telling Jeremiah that this is a requirement that the contract be able to last for many days. God is giving you good advice. The verse is giving you good advice. By the way, just as a pro tip, that if God gives you good advice, take the advice that God gives, and that's that your contract shall last for many days. Now we're up to the next Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, called Ksherin Muchtov Es a Get. Everybody can write a get. Everyone is kosher to write the get. I feel chayra shota v'katan. Even a person who is not of sound mind, the deaf mute, the insane, the minor. Ha'isha koseves eskita. A woman can write the get and give it to the husband as a transaction. We saw this yesterday. And then the husband will give it to her as a get. But ish kosev shifra. The woman has to give the man, when the man pays her the ksuba payment at the divorce, the woman has to give him a receipt. But the man can write this receipt for the woman. She doesn't have to write it. Because we uphold this get with its signatures. And so therefore, the woman does not have to write the get, and the man does not have to write the receipt. And we don't care who writes the get in the first place, because the upholding of the get is through its signatures. So now the Gemara is going to try to understand this. How could the minors write the get? Don't we require the get to be written lishma? We don't we require intent when we write this get, that you need to know you're writing it for this specific woman. And these people, the Chereshot Katan, they don't have sound mind. They don't have the ability to focus their mind and write something lishma for the purpose of this woman. So the Gemara answers, the first Gemara says, so Amar Rav Huna, first answer is, the answer is where there's an adult standing next to the person writing it. And what's this adult doing? The adult is telling him to write it for this person. So Rav Huna, explains Rashi, is saying that our Mishnah follows the position of Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar requires the writing of the get lishma. And so therefore we need lishma, but we need it. So how are we going to get lishma? We're going to get lishma by having an adult standing next to the minor and telling him what to do. Whereas the concluding clause, which says in our Mishnah that the kiyum of the get is only with its signatures, that's referring to Eidei Misira. That's referring to the witnesses of it being handed over. And the majority of the witnesses are handed over in front of the signatures. And what we're saying is that a woman can write the get and the man can write the receipt, because it doesn't matter, because it's going to be handed over in front of the Eidei Misira. And but it's not a reference to the writing of the get without an adult by it. Meaning to say that our Mishnah does require ksiva lishma, does require it with the right intent. That's according to Rav Huna. So it says Rav Nachman to Rav Huna, Rav Nachman, if that's the case, that you're saying that our Mishnah is referring to where there's a gadol omed al gabav, there's an adult standing next to him, and these people, even though they can't have intent, when the adult stands next to them, their intent is created by the adult standing next to them. If that's the case, says Rav Nachman, our Mishnah's list is not exhaustive. It doesn't list an idolater. So if that's the case, that an adult can stand next to the minor and make his intent good, why don't we also list an idolater if there's a Jewish adult standing next to him? It's going to say, okay, yeah, that would be a valid approach. It doesn't work. We have a brisa that states that idolater is not able to write the get. Now the Gemara answers, the idolater, you can't just stand next to the idolater and make his lack of intent into intent, because the idolater is an adult, so he has his own intent. So the fact that he has his own intent means to say, even though this person is saying, have intent for this, maybe he's going to have his own mind. And so therefore, since he has his own mind, we're not going to allow this principle of the adult standing get next to him. So the Gemara says, Hadar Amar Rav Nachman, then Rav Nachman changes his mind. And Rav Nachman says, hold on, let me stop the recording here. We could have a few more minutes to go on, but I'll stop the recording.